Calling to order the Housing and Human Welfare Standing Committee meeting for Tuesday, March 19th at 6:02 p.m. First item on the agenda is roll call of committee members in attendance. Present is myself, committee chair, Alderwoman Shanika Henson. Present also in attendance to my right
is Alderwoman Ellie Tierney, Ward 1.
Absent today is Alderman Mark Rodriguez. He sends his regrets that he is not able to attend. For a second item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I motion that we approve the agenda.
I second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Item number 4, business before the committee. The first item for business before the committee is approval of the minutes. The minutes were prepared by Ms. Green from the last meeting of the Housing and Human Welfare Committee. I have had the opportunity to review the minutes. They are in order with the agenda. They go over the nominees that were before us, and then the development update that we looked at. And then there was no pending legislation. It was just a number of nominees for various appointments to different boards and commissions throughout the city of Annapolis. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I just have a question, if Madam Chair, if we ever resolved the issue on the one appointment that was postponed because she wasn't here.
We had two of those, and Ms. Cortez and then Ms. Sims. I have not heard back from Mr. Rowell on either of those. Okay. They have not reappeared. Ms. Green, do you have any more information on the status of Ms. Sims or Ms. Cortez? No, they haven't reached out to me either.
I did not mean to stump you. Okay. I motion then. I motion that we approve the meeting minutes of February 19th.
I second the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries. Next item on the agenda is election of the committee chair.
Dun, 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 dun. I will make a motion that Alderwoman Shanika Henson will be our committee chair for the upcoming year.
Thank you. I will accept the re-election, and I will second the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries.
All righty.
Next item on the agenda, legislation before the committee.
Development update.
Oh, is that next? Oh, development update. Absolutely right. Annual election of the committee chair, development update, ID number 40518, development update, planning and zoning, February 2019. Mr. Gutwald. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Pete Gutwald, Director of Planning and Zoning. I don't really have any major updates. If you have questions about a specific project, I know we talked at length the other night about a lot of the MPDUs and projects that were submitted in fees versus providing the actual units. But the status of developments from last month, there hasn't been any change in any of those subdivisions or projects. So unless you have specific questions about a particular project, I can try and answer those questions.
Thank you. Not MPDU related, but the proposed development at Tyler and Forest Drive, the Royal Farms, is that on the spreadsheet?
It is not as of yet because they just had their community meeting, I think, last night.
It's tonight.
It's tonight. Okay. So it'll get on here as soon as they make a formal application to the city, and they have to have their community input meeting first before they can do that. But just so you know, we're looking at another way, maybe, tracking them in case they don't move forward or whatever, so people know that there's been a community input meeting, sort of the concept plan and when that date was and the summary of it. So we're looking at doing something to track just those. So that's the update to that, because we might be doing something separate than this, but if it's the committee's desire, we could probably add that to these lists. They just had a community input meeting, but at this point, we haven't done that yet.
And if you know, if not, it's understandable. They're going to require, I believe it's a variance for the Royal Farms development. Do you know offhand what that would be?
I don't. I mean,
Okay.
the only thing I can think of is that it's a setback issue.
Okay. And then the Kitty Academy that is looking to go where Thomas Woods would have been, that's number 41 on the list that we have. What is the status of that?
Same thing. They've had their community input meeting. They haven't made formal application. They're running up against their 30-day, because Tom came in to me today. They're running up against their 30 days to get their community input meeting into us. But that is going to require, that's a special exception, so that's going to have to go to the board, and it is obviously a major subdivision, so it'll go in front of the planning commission as well, under the new rules.
Okay. Alderwoman?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. On the West Street developments, is that, for example, 285 West Street, is that still Bizzuto, or is that his new company, or is the new company?
Bizzuto.
Okay.
Both
so-
of those projects are Bizzuto.
Okay, so the new company is for the potential Spa Road.
Yes, Mr. Baum he has left Bizzuto, so he's now on his own or with
Okay.
another company, yeah.
Okay, so they're still Bizzuto. Okay, and then it's not really housing related. I keep bugging you on that lot. Nothing submitted on that lot at Monticello and,
Nope, other than the rumors of they want to put more townhomes right there.
yeah,
But they haven't submitted or even, I mean, I know they got a permit to remove the tanks,
yeah.
and that's all I got. So
That's
I'm
it.
guessing it's not going to be a gas station anymore.
No,
Since they removed the tanks.
Corner Monticello and West Street, yeah.
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 Okay, that's all I have from your list. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is there any further discussion on ID number 40518? No. Seeing no further discussion, moving forward to ID number R4518, the 2018 Forest Drive eSports Sector Study. Present before us, we have Director Gutwald and Dr. Nash.
Just for everybody's edification and recognition, is our chairman of the planning commission, Mr. Bob Wallman, sitting
Yes.
back here. I didn't know if you want to bring him to the conversation, or
If Mr. Waltman would be so kind to join us at,
The table?
yeah.
Yeah.
so I'm just going to open it up. Do you want a presentation, or you just want to get into the conversations? We have notes that you sent. Sally has prepared some comments, based on the notes that you sent, or did you just want to open it up? Or
Would you like to just get into the
I
conversation?
think we should, yeah, and I apologize, I didn't get my matrix to you. I don't even know if you got it. I mean, I just sent it a half hour ago.
No,
so
we
I was just-
received Mr. Rodriguez's comments, or
Yeah.
his thoughts, and obviously Alderwoman Henson's, and
Yep, I have that.
we can go right into that. I mean,
I think that's
you know the
best.
gist of the study.
Yeah.
It's been discussed at length, so I'll turn it over to Sally.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening.
Good
Right.
evening.
Good evening.
So what I did is I went through your comments, and some of them seemed more like notes, some of them were questions. But for the ones like demographics, you say refine 2.2.4 demographics to include data for each racial demographic group. So I'm assuming that means you'd like there to be an amendment to the plan that shows the breakdown in race and ethnicity for the city. Is that what you have in mind?
Yes, it had white and then it had minority. There can be a lot of difference in minority. So
Right.
I was looking forward to have not just white and minority, but white and Latino and black and, what those different groups are.
Right. And we have, I've pulled some census data, to show from 2010 to 2017, the increase in people who identified as Hispanic ethnicity has grown in the city, while all other groups have, well, no, that's not quite true. While whites and number of blacks have shrunk, or black is pretty holding steady, but that is where our group that's growing the fastest, I should say. So Asians grew a little bit. We don't have a lot of American Indian or Asian, just the groups. So census breaks race down into white, black, American Indian, and Asian. And then it breaks down ethnicity of Hispanic. You identify as Hispanic, yes or no, and then you can identify as Hispanic and a certain race. So it's Hispanic and white, Hispanic and African American, Hispanic and Asian. You know, that's just how the census breaks it down. So looking at Hispanic of any race, that number has been growing over the last 7 years.
How would you like for the committee to format requests like that? Would you like for us to draft it as an amendment to, and to format it to say Amendment 1 asks for that change, or what's the best way to communicate that?
I think that would be good, yeah. And
okay.
I have tables and I have maps from the census that I can send you, and you can, you know, see if that's what you had in mind. And you know, there's different geographies you can pick for census maps. You can do block group, you can do, you know, place. So it won't necessarily be by the sector study area, it'll be citywide data, but I can send that to you and see if that's, you know, what you had in mind.
It says in that same section, this new trend is creating population and worker growth that is not tied to new home construction. Where did we get that from? Do we understand that?
Right, so what we know is looking at 2010 and looking at 2017 census numbers, which, you know, the census is every 10 years, but they do the American Community Survey more often than that, but it is an estimate, so it's not as accurate as the every 10-year census, but, you know, that's just my caveat. But so if we're looking at 2010 compared to 2017, the main difference we see is an increase in the number of people living in a house. And so the census it's actually showing a decrease in total housing units from 2010 to 2017, but it's showing let's see. So if you look at people living per housing units, the number of people living in a housing unit, 1.51 and higher in 2010 was 64. The number 1.51 or more in 2017 is 275. So you see that number rapidly increasing compared to total housing units. And even if you're looking at just our population, if you're looking at like our number of new dwelling units that we've added each year, it's about 50 a year. You know, those numbers aren't driving that increase. It's the increase in people living in one housing unit.
So we are adding density, not units, density people.
Yes.
Okay. So as a city, does the study make any recommendations on what you do as a city to plan for that? Because we have adequate public facility ordinances that say adequate water, sewer, schools, with growth in terms of number of units, but do we have any planning that addresses when your growth is population growth as opposed to structures?
Right, great question. So there's one thing that caught the school system completely by surprise, you know, because that's not what they look at. They look at the number of permits we approve. And that's traditionally always been what we looked at too, because that in the past was the predictor of population growth. But now we have to look at a whole system of what causes people to live in, to have more people living in one house. And a lot of it has to do with the affordability of housing in the city. We know that the housing in the city, we have a lot of subsidized housing, We have a lot of luxury housing, but we don't have a lot of things in the middle where the 80 to 120% people making compared to the median average income making 80 to 120% or so, it's called workforce housing usually. There's not a lot of options for those people. So what do? They move in together. I mean, a lot of it also is families, it's tied to demographics of increase in Hispanic families who are more likely to live together than to have, they're more likely to live together till one family member gets on his feet and, then they're able to afford their own housing unit. But, so it's both those things, but the primary driver is the lack of affordable mid-range housing, workforce housing, I should say.
Can I interject, even though I did, because it sort of parallels with what I was, one of my points to. So there, to tie into that, this is part of, I don't know if we're still in the introduction or not, but you're basically kind of analyzing where we're at, and it was a pretty huge discovery that the marginal increase in household size went from 2.3 to 2.41, apparently independent of home construction. So, but then it's all sort of related, because then you say that it ties into both the city and the sector are adding more workers than jobs. So you have more workers than jobs living in different. So the missing ingredient is, it's a great argument for the introducing affordable housing, and you can't let that point be lost. It seems to be very obvious that there is a shortage of affordable housing, right, as we speak.
Which is kind of the point of the whole sector study, is how do we create opportunities for both different kinds of employment options, but also different kinds of housing options. So everyone, no matter what percentage of median income you're in, can afford to live somewhere in the city. And that it's called the missing middle. That's what the city is missing. But that's the whole, that's one of the main drivers of the sector study, is how can we provide these options for people who want to live in the city, want to work in the city, and are already living in the city but would like to live in their own place.
Can you help us identify what the sector study does to address the affordable housing? I saw it identify the problem in a few places, but I didn't see where it said this is the solution to the affordable housing issue.
Right, well, the whole philosophy behind creating walkable mixed-use communities is to create more, I say affordable, I don't mean like what Teresa Wellman means when she says affordable, which is subsidized housing. I mean this missing middle housing. So the whole idea of creating these kind of walkable mixed-use communities means that the cost of is making it easier for developers to come in and provide the product we want, which is affordable housing, and figuring out how to encourage that kind of development. That's the whole idea behind community character, behind mixed use, is if this is what we want, this is what we want it to look like, how can we make this kind of product easier for a developer to get approved? The shorter the approval process, the easier the approval process, the more predictable the approval process is, the less the cost of the final product is going to be. Because every delay in the approval process, every additional regulation in the approval process, that developer doesn't take it out of his final profit. He passes that on to the units, which is why all of our new units are $500,000. It's because Annapolis is known as having a high barrier of entry for developers.
The units are large in scale and then all luxury. Is there one of the things I asked was reducing the size of the units. I highlighted a community, Forest Glen. It's in Ward 6, and it's two-story townhomes in the development, and the price point on the townhomes, they sell in the 200s. And then I highlighted another community, Monroe Court, Brashears and Jackson, and that's in eSports neighborhood. I didn't see it referenced in the study, but that it sells in the low 200s, that community. It's in need of some updates if we were doing any of the grant funding that we have for communities. But those ones have held the value, but they have stayed at a lower price point, and I don't know why. I was thinking maybe it's because of the scale of the homes. It's because maybe they don't have some of the luxury features like the newer homes have. How do you encourage that sort of development that keeps the price point naturally low because you don't have those luxury features that jacks up the price?
Did you want to say something? Go ahead.
I'm going to continue probably on what Sally was saying, but it's the ability for a developer or a plan to come in to be able to do a different type of unit, different types, have flexibility in different types of units, so he can provide those bare, those low-cost housing units while he's making, while he's doing other types of units that are higher end. So you mix the types of units, which is mixing sort of the socioeconomic profiles of every one of these types of units, allowing for those types of units to remain at a certain level at a low cost, if you will, or cost affordable to other individuals, while he has the opportunity to do other things within that plan, if you will, that may be of higher value. So you have a range of types of units which have a range of housing costs. And those types of flexibilities that are built into your code. And you could also, there's ways, the next step when we talk about changes to the zoning code is to change those ways in which we look at those types of developments to require certain minimums that they provide in that type of development. So there is a range of types of units and the range of housing costs.
So, please.
This is the Housing and Welfare Committee.
Yes.
So housing is a big issue.
Yeah.
If I could just sort of hopefully simplify and summarize a little bit, there are two ways. You asked what's the answer to how we can get more, actually it's workforce housing. MPDU is actually more valuable than the government subsidized housing, which is affordable housing. That's the definitions we need to get clear. Affordable housing is government subsidized in some way, so it's either Section 8 or it's Housing Authority, and maybe some other things, but those are the two main sources of support. Whereas workforce or MPDU is built for people who are of a greater income. Ms. Pete and Sally are right in that the zoning codes and our incentives and flexibilities need to change. That's true. And if I have a minute, I'll get into what the sector study and all this community character and what the sector study really talks about and where it's possible. But the second answer not only changes in the code is we need to change the MPDU legislation. And I just spent an hour with Dr. Nash and Teresa Wellman talking over this specific issue because I would like to see the Planning Commission, in coordination with you, make this more a part of the comp plan and really move the whole concept forward. And what I learned in the course of an hour with Ms. Wellman was a lot of changes that can be made and a lot of changes that would be consistent with other jurisdictions in the state. That if we, for instance, change the length of time that a unit has to stay in the MPDU program, either if it's a sale unit or a rental unit, if we change the horizon, totally consistent with cities and counties across the state, they're not all the same. We would change and keep the inventory of MPDU units in the city, at a constantly increasing rate.
Yep.
That's just one of the ideas, but we really need to address in some ways and make some policy changes to MPDUs because they're not getting built.
and there are various reasons why they're not getting built. And you're absolutely correct that the answers to your question, are not actually in this study. It didn't really address it, but okay. We need to keep moving. We need to see what's going on with it. And those are, in very general terms, some of the things that, that I've learned.
Thank you.
And just in the course of this discussion, I think we'll probably talk about a few others in terms of where can affordable housing or MPDU or workforce housing actually get built. And the city of Annapolis doesn't have a lot of opportunities. It has the opportunities to revive and redo some of the older developments, whether they're private or public or mixed, okay? But it doesn't have a lot of raw land to do anything new, so it needs to be very careful. And what this study does is, it doesn't say it clearly enough, is to identify certain places where you can build more density. We're not talking about changing the character of Eastport. We're not talking about changing the character of Tyler Heights. We're talking about very selected places where usually commercial activity already exists, and then thinking about how to make those places a little higher, a little broader, more people, and the units of housing that will be built will be more affordable because they won't be in luxurious places. Tyler Heights and Forest Drive is, to me, the perfect example of that, and we're missing a great opportunity by this Royal Farms going in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But specifically, if you want to get into those kinds of changes that this study suggests, we can get into them because we know it.
There's a lot of people that agree with you that are assembling in a matter of minutes at Tyler Heights to express that opinion.
Well,
Dr. Nash.
Isn't that ironic?
have you ever heard of the term fake news?
Yeah.
That's exactly what that flyer is.
Oh,
Yeah.
are we talking about the
yeah.
flyer?
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
I had
That's not
two
helpful.
big takeaways. One was that and it was something that I was not my understanding before, that we cannot attract sufficient commercial development to have the jobs we need because the value of our commercial property is too low, and then that's keeping our number of jobs down. Is that correct? Is that, I think I wanna, it says, is that a correct understanding, a correct takeaway? Was that in here?
I think
On page 14, it says the value of commercial property needs to increase so that the sector, let me read it directly because I wrote it and then I think I have a typo in what I wrote. So I want to just get back to the value of commercial properties needs to increase, or does say to that the sector can attract more private business. What does that mean?
It means that, how do you make it attractive for businesses? You make it attractive by having enough customers. You have enough customers if they can get to you easily, or if they live close by. So how do you actually create more commercial activity and work activity at the same time? You have to have simply more people who are able to access those businesses.
So commercial, I took commercial to mean not just retail businesses, but let's say you're an attorney's office or an accounting firm, or when we looked at the people who can afford to live in Annapolis, who live here, it was a lot of professionals. So professionals often aren't retail, it's people who work in professions. And I thought, are we not setting up shop here professionally so that people who can afford to live here work here? Because our commercial properties don't have a value like a downtown office in DC or a downtown office in Baltimore. Is that a factor in deciding where I put my law firm or my architecture firm? That was not my understanding. I was looking to understand that point more, because it sounds like if we want to cut down on the inbound, outbound traffic and our residents are professionals, we would need to have more professional businesses here. And is that the reason why we don't?
I think the idea, I think, you know, we're dissecting the sentence, but I think the value is exactly where I think where Bob was going with it, is that in order, so there is the idea that we create opportunities for businesses, jobs, employment centers along the corridor. And so it also at the same time creates a place where you can live, work, and play. So you don't have, so there's the ability to reduce the trips that are going up and down the corridor. But at the same time, I think it is trying to, if you revitalize and you have a vibrant economy, if you will, as it's entitled, the introduction paragraph to this theme is saying, if we create this economy, that the synergy of live, work, and play, that will create value for more commercial offices, employment opportunities in the area. So,
I agree with you that commercial includes all kinds of activities other than residential.
Yeah.
And all of them, I mean, there are many things that are done these days where one does not need to be next to or, you know, in the office of. You can be an architect and things are sent digitally all over, an accountant, and you digitally, it's only lawyers who like to be next to courthouses, but everybody else can, is, everybody else.
Understood.
So, but all of those things create, they do create opportunity. So, but it requires a certain sort of, requires some more density than what we have, but very carefully selected density. This study isn't saying to recreate vast neighborhoods. So that's not what it says.
It says, and then I'm jumping to my other second large takeaway on page 49. Yeah. It says and then I'm jumping in midstream in this thought. It says they remove old guidance that hinder change and dictate a suburban strip character. So it kind of like puts down suburban strip character like that's naughty. And people that I spoke to said, I enjoy living in the suburbs. I moved to Forest Drive because I want to live in the suburbs. I don't want to live in a village. I don't want to live in an urban center. I want to live in a suburb.
Okay. Can I answer that?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can? You said you told me to answer, now he's going to answer.
One can live on a suburban street. But what we're talking about are the strips. We're not talking about changing Colonial Heights. We're not talking about changing any of those neighborhoods. Victor Parkway. We're not talking about, fine, it's there. It's not going to change. It's suburbia. But what we are talking about, we're talking about nodes or village-like places specifically along Forest Drive, and then obviously on Bay Ridge it already exists, the eSports Shopping Center and the Hillsmere Shopping. But on Forest Drive there's a few opportunities, and on Chicklet Pit there's a few opportunities where you could actually put a few more people, and it would help everybody. It would give them access to, your first question had to do with grocery shopping. Right? Well, we're not going to get another giant big box grocery store in, but what we can get, you're right, are more convenient stores. Now, we're going to get a Royal Farms, which is not what people wanted. They wanted a green boulevard. And frankly, if there were a 3-story residential with a Royal Farms down below even, without the gas pumps and everything, we would have gotten everything we wanted. So we're not talking about changing people's lives in suburbia. We're talking about changing the boulevards and the corridors. Okay, and there's a tremendous amount of misconception about that in this.
So I appreciate that I am taking that in isolation, and
Please.
that sentence lives in a much larger context. But I got a lot of screams about I enjoy living in suburbia, and the feeling of that this study is trying to make me live in an urban village or live in a village, and people not wanting that. The people in Eastport, that is much more of a village-like concept. They have smaller streets, they don't live on a busy thoroughfare, and so they embrace and want the dynamic of a walkable village. But my Forest Drive people who speak to me, they embrace a suburban characteristic. And I was thinking, if it's if we think it's an old, outdated suburban strip, why not make it an updated suburban strip? Where's the push to turn a suburban strip into a village? But what I hear you saying is taking parts that are on the strip and making those villages off of the strip, or is that what you're saying?
Well, when you said updating a strip, a shopping strip, yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. Across the street from Annapolis Seafood, on the other quadrant of that intersection, there's a small suburban strip shopping center. Now, there's a place where one could easily go up a couple of stories. You follow me? And there'd be some housing on top. It would be not expensive housing. Down below would be commercial activity, pretty much the same commercial activity that you have now, but you would be making things. That's the village. But it doesn't happen with the Royal Farms, by the way. That's not, and it's no employment in a Royal Farms. There's only like, 5 people working in a place like that. Anytime you have smaller businesses, you have much more employment than you do with anything which is larger.
That's against conventional wisdom, but
for 72 years, I've been going against conventional wisdom.
Alderwoman Pendell Charles.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Walden, I heard you say that we can get a little bit more on Chicklet Pit Round Road. Do you understand that there are over 16,000 cars, vehicles that travel Chicklet Pit Round Road every day?
Well, what I'm saying is that there could be some residential, some mixed use there to create more of a residential community. Now, there's not much room left.
With over 16,000 cars, vehicles traveling that roadway every day?
I travel that roadway all the time. I know what it's like.
And I live there. And if you try to convince the Greater Parole Community Association or any residents in Ward 3 to put more vehicles on Chicklet Pit Round Road, you're in for a fight.
Well, there are more people in the city, there's more movement around, and there need to be a couple of things done at the intersection to help things move faster. But it's always going to, that's the way it's going to be.
Even if they move faster, you can't get away from over 16,000 vehicles a day.
The numbers are vast, but they move. They move down Forest Drive.
And we like that they move. We don't need any more.
Oh.
Try to convince the folks in Ward 3.
Well, there's a couple of things that need to be done to help them move onto and off of Chicklet Pit Road better. One of them is the intersection of, what's the name, Windsor Drive? No. Fairfax Road. That intersection needs to be redone, okay? There needs to be a light there. It needs to be timed with the lights at 665 and Forest. And all of that needs to be arranged in that way. And there's a couple of right turn lanes in several directions that need to be added to it. None of this at horrible expense. Unfortunately, all under the jurisdiction of the state or the county.
Talk to the folks that live on Fairfax Road. They scream and holler all the time about the accidents and the sight line and all that sort of thing. It's a big congested area right there.
Yes.
And that's what I hear all the time.
Right.
But to put more, because remember now, we abut the county when it comes to the line between the city and the county. Parole Town Center can do whatever they want to do, and there's nothing we can do to stop them. That does not help us at all in that area. So that's what I'm saying. Putting more in the Ward 3 area is I could not go home at night because I'm the one that gets the 10 o'clock phone calls at night and the 12 o'clock knocks on the door that say, Rhonda, fix this, it's horrible.
Well, one of the things that you can do is to join into the effort to actually do some fixing there. Because there are a couple of things that were recommended. I don't think that they actually even made it into the study, but that the traffic engineers recommended a few things, and they're not all that expensive.
So why didn't they make it into the study?
I don't know. They are in the traffic part way in the back.
Yeah.
And they have to do with the Fairfax Road intersection.
I saw that.
Okay, and then you probably understand the other two, going south on Chicklet Pit to get onto 665, that slip lane needs to be made bigger, you know, with a longer queue up, and then coming off the peninsula and onto Chicklet Pit, going west, that lane also needs to be made better.
Okay, but there's a lot that needs to be done.
But
and like you said, we have to work with the city and the county and the state.
And
Right, so also let me clarify one thing, that we don't mean more density than what we would allow now. What we mean is a redistribution of the density we allow now, and distributed in a way that is more strategic than what could happen in the next 20 years if we don't change anything, if we continue on our course that we're on now.
that's really important, because as it stands now, there's a lot that can get built, but it's not really well channeled, and it's not really well designed. And we have the opportunity. This study it's a study, you know. It doesn't detail specifics, you know, in terms of zoning.
But people take it as gospel.
I got you.
How is it, taking into context the older women's comments on traffic and some of the comments in the notes in the study, I am having a hard time understanding how some of the developments are passing our adequate public facilities when we look at what the residents feel on traffic. The study says commercial and industrial development can indeed improve the financial well-being of local government. Residential development can strain it. The obvious conclusion is that bedroom communities are not economically sustainable at current tax rates. So it sounds like the people who live here feel squeezed by the traffic, and that when you add the new developments on, it's not creating enough of a tax base to be able to absorb what it adds to your city's services to have new developments. If we have an APF in place, how are we approving new residential developments, especially when we know that our growth is growing beyond the number of residential units that we build? How is our growth responsible even without all the wonderful ideas here?
Well, depending on the level of service, a developer does have to mitigate the impact of that development. So if the level of services is E or F, the developer can't make it worse, the situation worse.
Do you feel like that's one of those things that is great in theory, but then in practice we're having a bit of a disconnect? Because the statement in the study is saying that the obvious conclusion is that bedroom communities are not economically sustainable at current tax rates. So what that says to the taxpayers is that my taxes are about to increase, and then if we implement these wonderful ideas, they're going to increase a lot.
No. So bedroom communities, why are they expensive? They're expensive because this is like the suburban model. Everyone lives at the end of a cul-de-sac. The city has to pay for the road to go to that cul-de-sac. Oh, and these houses were built in the 70s, so there was no APF. So the city is wholly responsible for maintaining that street. The city is responsible for maintaining the water and sewer pipes, although we do charge for those services. But the city is responsible for the fire department vehicles that have to go all the way down that street to reach that house. And everyone in that cul-de-sac, they can't walk to work. They have to get in their car and drive. And over the last 10 years, there's been a big shift of people who, where are they working? They're working in Washington, D.C. So everyone's getting in their car, driving down their long street, and going to Washington, D.C. That is what is not economically sustainable. That is what drives traffic congestion, is that everyone's leaving at the same time, going to the same place. What is sustainable is having people going to different places, taking different modes, walking, biking, taking transit, and yes, driving, but sharing that burden across the different modes, going at different times, going at different places. That's what is going to mitigate traffic congestion in the future in the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Is that real? I hate to interrupt you. Is that realistic until their jobs are here? And it sounds like to me that the cost of living in Annapolis started to go up. And that's when people started to have to commute out for the jobs that support living in Annapolis. So we built more higher end places to live, and property values went up. So as people moved out, aged out, whatever happened, people who moved in, bought into Annapolis, were buying into a higher price point. And those people needed to work outside of the city because we have a lot of retail jobs, we have a lot of clerical jobs with the government services that are supported in Annapolis. It was not the income level that you could also live in Annapolis as well. So everybody was commuting out of the city for work. So different modal forms wouldn't be supported by working here. Even if we had 100 bike lanes, if you work in DC, it would just be for your leisure. Once you got home, you still would be inbound, outbound traffic.
It's about rebalancing, but there's been a lot of reasons for that change. I mean, also look in the last 20 years, how many homes on Annapolis Neck and Bimby Beach Peninsula have turned over from summer homes to year-round homes. So now all those people, again, there wasn't an APF that determined whether those people could move into year-round homes, but there was a whole cultural shift where people want to live on the water. Okay, that's great, they can live on the water, but that means they have to drive all the way down Forest Drive to get anywhere. That's, you know, that's one of the big societal trends that has contributed to us being in the situation where we're in now. So we're going to have to look at other big societal trends and harness those to our advantage to rebalance the jobs and the homes and the, you know, like Pete was saying, the live, work, and play. We have to rebalance that because we've gotten a little bit out of whack.
So the big point of that, in that statement that you read out of the plan, was it's a balancing act. You got to start balancing it along with everything that Sally mentioned in terms of not just design, but also uses. Land uses have to be balanced in order so they're not, you know, you're not, the whole idea behind this plan is to reduce those needs and the impacts of that infrastructure, whether it's schools, libraries, roads, you name it. The idea is to balance that so there's not such a huge impact on that infrastructure that the city or the county or the public services are providing. And that's the whole idea behind, that's the genesis behind the whole plan. To get to the suburban comment, it's, yeah, we're not suggesting throw the baby out with the bathwater. What we're suggesting is to move in a different direction on specific areas along the corridor where appropriate. We've identified some nodes, but that doesn't mean it's the end-all be-all, where we can improve upon that. And where the existing neighborhoods that will be sustainable, we're not adding any new, we're not trying to add new development. We're trying to refocus what happens on the corridor, to reinvest in the community and to connect the communities together. And all that together, and I keep saying this in all the other committees, it's not a silver bullet that answers one of these questions. It's the plan together comprehensively, in whole, in total. All of these things coming together make it for a more sustainable community and a place where people will want to live, work, and play. not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The community, this is suburban type of development will continue to exist and will be there. The idea is to refocus some of that energy that's going on in the corridor, because there is energy, there is movement. They are interested. There are people that are interested in this corridor. But there's also areas that need a lot of improvement. There are blighted areas along this corridor that we want to create more of an investment and a way in which people can tolerate the type of development that's going on. So that is.
One of the implementation suggestions was to implement the MX zoning in the urban center low, urban center, it was two of the other ones, urban center.
Well, the MX, our existing MX zone could be sort of a template for those community character types, so it would still need a lot of work to translate them exactly. But I did want to note that government uses are allowed in MX.
Okay.
It's just that the problem is in the table of uses online, the government uses is listed, where's my sheet? That government uses basically should be bolded in that table, because there's subsections under that, the offices and other uses.
In our code online, it's very difficult to see the separation of the uses, because it should be bolded and the list is underneath of it. That's what she's getting at.
Yeah. Oh.
So if you were looking at it, it confused me for 2 years. And I look at it every day.
So MX
right.
currently.
So it lists government uses, and then it lists sub-uses, which are offices, other government and government-related structures, and then public schools and colleges. And then it goes on to the next thing in the use table, which is also something that starts with G. I forgot what it was. But so it's not evident that those are sub-uses, basically.
Thank you.
So they're permitted and special exception. Public schools and colleges aren't permitted. But again, that's something as we move forward and we really think about how to translate the community character designations into actual zoning, which is how those recommendations would be implemented, not from passage of the adoption of the plan itself. We'd have to think a lot about what parts of our MX zoning district are working, what do we need to tweak.
So if I understand this correctly, when you speak to it on page 69, the work on the MX zoning is to incorporate those designations, which would be the urban village center, urban neighborhoods, greenway, that they would be then under the umbrella of MX zoning? Is that the...
They would... It's a concept, yeah. The MX zoning would be kind of a template, but it would have to be tweaked for each different character type. But the idea is that a lot of these character types would be primarily mixed use, allow mixed use throughout.
At those opportune areas.
The concept behind the strategy is, again, to create flexible type of zoning classifications, not the typical Euclidean, where you have residential single family over here, commercial industrial over there, and somewhere in between you have townhouses. The idea is so that the three uses can be intertwined, as Mr. Wellman has just suggested. Maybe you have retail on the first floor, residential above. So that's the concept of looking at, of bringing to light what that MX zoning is referring to.
Would it preserve the magic on West Street? Would it kind of make sure that if we do anything different to it to incorporate, to bring these to life, that we make sure it doesn't slip anything different into West Street and we don't wind up with something that was not originally intended to be there?
Absolutely. I mean, that would be the next step. The implementation steps would be the fine tuning that so your concerns are taken care of, and we build that box of what they can and can't do.
Yeah.
So
codify. That's what gets codified.
Our game plan is possibly, to take the community character designations as we move forward into the comp plan, refine them a bit, maybe differentiate them a little bit more, or have a little, maybe fewer, or maybe one more, something like that. Apply them citywide. And then after the comp plan is adopted, to look at a comprehensive rezoning process where we narrow down our 31 zoning classifications to, you know, maybe 10 or 15, something like that. So that's our long-term game plan that Pete just said was unrealistic. But
Rhonda, sorry.
Alderwoman Tierney.
Oh, okay. I just, where do you think we lost the narrative here where, I mean, I'm hearing my colleague assume that Chickapin is going to be increased with cars when this whole plan is meant to change that trajectory, and that higher density development does not add cars. But that aside, I mean, the messaging here of just the basic points you have in the introduction have been lost, and I guess it's a separate discussion on when we try to rein it back in. I'm looking at, in your survey, 64% of the respondents wanted a walkable and bikeable village-like neighborhood. So, I mean, we went from that to this, you know, this overreaction, or, I mean, is...
You want to comment, or just is that rhetorical?
Yeah, I guess it's just like, I mean, I don't know if you're going to convince the public at this point that this is not a pro-development.
So as I said, I think where it got lost, as you said, and I think Alderman Hudson started this whole thing, it's sort of the sector study, and no pun intended, was driven by the traffic issues. And now that Bob is sitting next to me, you've heard me say this time and time again in council work sessions and other committees, we struggled and grappled with, what does this corridor want to be? Does it want to be a place on our way to someplace else, or does it want to be a place where you want to live, work, and play? And we never got, I don't think we ever got a consensus on that. There were individuals, there are people, there's a sector that obviously want to get from A to B, and they need to move through the corridor. Yeah. And then there's the 64% of other people who said, yeah, but this is a good idea too. Yeah. So now, okay, how do we balance this? How do we balance the traffic needs and refocusing and repurposing land uses along the corridor to make it the place where you live, work, and play?
I may be a naive optimist. I'm an optimist, but I may also be totally naive. But I think that there's a way to actually integrate those two visions. The people on the Annapolis Neck and a lot of people in Eastport need to get to work. And the rush hours are, and Forest Drive is now designed basically to handle the rush hours. The introduction of the smart traffic signals by the county along Forest Drive added a 10 to 15% capacity on the roadway without having to build more lanes, but just simply by doing it smarter. The Chicklet Round intersection is always going to be a bottleneck. If you by magic and zillions of dollars opened up that bottleneck, all you do is send traffic further down Forest Drive. So it acts as kind of a valve in some way. It could be made better, but it will never be made perfect. The other vision is that it's a green boulevard and that people live along that boulevard. And that's what we're trying to do, is to try to integrate those two visions. The one vision already exists. It's somewhere short of a superhighway. But the other vision, which is really a more city-oriented vision, is how do people live along this road? How do we get some of the things that the city needs along this road, such as housing, perhaps more business development, and thirdly, in terms of traffic, people coming off the side roads and getting onto Forest to access it for their own purposes. Traffic. One of the things that this traffic study, at least that I got out of it, and I ain't no engineer, was that it works extremely well for the people traveling end to end. Where it's not working well is for the people who are coming off the side roads and trying to get on, okay? And that when they talk about level of service going down to E's and F's and so forth, it's not for the people shooting through, it's for the people trying to get on. And that there are various strategies by which, and various specific implementations, little changes here and there in the curb and the turn lanes and stuff like that, timing of signals and things, so that it's an E and F for the people trying to get on, but not for the people shooting through. One of the questions that you asked was about the smart signals. The engineers suggested that if I got this number right, 4 signals along Bay Ridge or 3 on Bay Ridge and 1 on Hilltop would provide the same additional 10 to 15% capacity, but you got to do it fairly soon. The problem is, how do you pay for it? They're really expensive, right? $250,000 to $400,000 a piece for some reason, okay? How do you pay for it? Well, one of the ways that you pay for it is you start demanding more from people who want to build. We haven't been demanding enough from people who build in this city. One of the first things that Eileen Fogarty was the director of planning here for many, 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 many years before I came. That's how long ago. And I sat down with her during the transition planning, and she said, you got to get more impact fees from these developers. You got to get more from them. That's one of the things Annapolis has never done enough. Okay, that's some policy that the city council can start to set. Adequate public facilities. You're already deliberating on the schools and whether to make them consistent with the county. That's your policy decision. But there are other, as you say, there are other public facilities such as old water mains or not so old water mains, or the traffic, or the libraries, or things that some of which we have control over, some of which we don't. But you need to clarify what those, what you mean by adequate, so that when it comes to through planning and it goes to the Planning Commission, we know what you mean by it. What does it mean? And that may mean you have to learn this traffic stuff and get educated on it as to what does it really mean, because traffic is perception.
Are you saying something different than Dr. Nash with the impact fees? I hear her saying that we have a high barrier to entry, and that if we add impact fees so that we can finance the cost of some of these improvements, that it will drive up the home prices, which will not give us the affordable housing. And that I don't know that there is a consensus that we need any more housing that's not affordable. That the housing we need is affordable housing, but that any more luxury townhomes, I don't know that there is a high demand that people are knocking down the doors for more luxury townhomes. There could be, I don't know.
I mean, that balance is a difficult balance to find. I'm going to leave it to the professional here.
Me too.
You've zeroed in on some of the really.
I'm just going to bridge the gap because I'm the rose between two thorns. I think what Sally is saying, the barriers, is the unexpected. Okay, so they have when you talk about somebody who comes in to develop property, they have a pretty good idea what this is supposed to cost them. But when they don't have an idea of what it's supposed to cost them, because there's unexpected processes that they don't know what will ultimately end up, that's a cost they're just going to have to, add to the whole overdevelopment. If they have an impact fee or a fee that's scheduled right in their pro formas, they can plop that in there and they know where they have to be at a certain point in time. I think what she's talking about in terms of the things that go on in the city of Annapolis, there's a point, because I deal with it on a regular basis, they come in and there's a point where I can tell them how to get to this far, and from that point forward, I have no idea. And it could take them anywhere from 3 months to 2 years to 6 years, really, depending upon what they're going to hit in that road bump from that point. And because you just don't know what you're going to run up against in terms of, public input, other additional time with it that they weren't expecting to play. And when you're holding a note on a piece of property, you got to pay contingency costs. You got to pay those continual costs to keep that property, control of that property for your development process. So those barriers get passed on. She's talking about barriers to going through the process. Because if you thought it was going to take you 3 months and it took you 3 years, that's a whole additional cost to a development process. Fees are a little different. They can plug those numbers in and run the schedule on that. So I'm just trying to explain. I heard what you were saying, but fees are something that that's a quantity, and that's a known quantity. The other part is not, so therefore they have to plug in and guess, and that's where the costs become barriers.
Negotiating impact fees for MPDUs. You provide MPDUs, you pay lower impact fees.
Right, so that goes to your question about how to incentivize the kind of development we want, and that's an example of one way. If your policy is we want workforce housing, well then you can change the regulations in a way that make it easier for developers who are providing workforce housing to go forward in a predictable path. Either they have lower fees or they have fewer regulatory hurdles they have to meet. Maybe they have priority permitting, although we don't really have such a thing. But theoretically, these are all the ways we can incentivize the kind of development we want. We can also allow certain tolerances to bulk regulations as a trade-off for a specific amenity that we want. There's also other things the city can do, like use public funds for tax breaks and things like that. That's a little bit more complicated and not really zoning per se, but those are the textbook ways that communities incentivize the kind of development they want.
Why was that not part of the study?
Well,
Or, yes.
The incentivizing development is a main strategy of the study in terms of getting the kind of development we want.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't list all these ideas because, it's different for different parts. eSports can be a little different of what you're going to do in that sector as you maybe at the lower end of Forest Drive versus the upper end of Forest Drive. So we didn't specifically go there, but we talk about changing the way we've been doing land use, changing the way in which we've allowed development to proceed. I mean, that's the crux of this message that's to get across here is that and because it's such a vast area, that's why we didn't get into very specifics on what those zoning codes could be different for different areas. And that was the one thing. I mean, I think the consultant at one point in time had, MX riddled all throughout the whole corridor. I was like, whoa, time out. We don't know if it's MX specifically. Let's just talk about, land use designations or character of the areas before we get into the specifics of that, because it would be a little different for every area. But again, in my mind, we are including all of that because we're talking about changing the way we've been doing things from a zoning, land use, traffic, and community facility standpoint.
It also depends on what the ultimate priority is that City Council has. And so that would require some kind of consensus within City Council about what your public policy goals are. And I don't know if that's worked out all the way because there's a lot of competing policy goals. I mean, is it school overcrowding or is it workforce housing? Because you can see there's some ways those things compete or conflict. So, the incentive would depend on what policy goal we were trying to achieve.
Alderwoman Pendle-Charles.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Several things. Number one, we have a real law school exam question out in Ward 3. Oh, yeah. And Mr. Gutwall knows what I'm talking about. When I first came on the council 5 years ago, there was a plan down at the Dorsey Heights area to put 220 apartments there. We, as I was coming in, we said too dense. The developer said, well, I'm sorry, we can't do any better than that. And I said, and we said in the community, oh, yes, you can. They came back 9 months later with homes, 48 townhomes. I think it's single-family townhomes. So they had a plan. Now, I don't know how they're selling. I think they've had some challenges down there. Then we get to Town Court at 2010 West Street, okay? It started off as being workforce housing. There were some issues that occurred along the way. Now it's going to be 48 rentals with a lot of education for the residents to become homeowners. We've worked with the developers to try to do this, you know, fee kind of thing, and, you know, not too much and not too little. But now we're coming up on a situation where we had MX zoning, didn't want the retail at the bottom because that wasn't going to work, even though it's off of West Street. There's a difficult way to get in and out. No retail would really work there. In the meantime, we need a traffic signal there at West and Gibraltar because we've got 600 plus students at the Monarch School, and that's a dangerous intersection. So we went to the developer and said, can you help us? And they said, okay. But now we have a problem with the roadway because it never got deeded over to the city. So now there needs to be some work done on the roadway because there are a lot of potholes. This is a law school question. So we understand where you're coming from, but we are in a really challenging area to try to get this done. In the meantime, we thought the traffic signal was going to cost one figure, and now it's another figure. So now we're working with the county and the city and the developer to see if we can still try to find the extra funds to get this traffic signal. So we've got a real dilemma there that I don't think either wards 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8 are have that problem. And so that's where we are out there now. Live, work, and play, that's different for residents in Ward 1 versus Ward 8 versus Ward 6 versus Ward 3. What we consider live, work, and play is not the same. And so that's a great concept, but it doesn't work for every ward. The fear in our ward, because this has gone on for decades, and when we look at the history of Annapolis, trying to fix a problem in every other ward is like a balloon. It's fine when you fix it, but when you get out to parole, the balloon gets bigger because now we've got the Annapolis Town Center, and they can pretty much put Maris out there, those apartment buildings, and we can't say anything. You've got the mall, you've got the Annapolis Harbor Center, and you've got all these wonderful places to shop and work and live, but it puts a squeeze between, I'd say, the library and out to Route 2. So we're squeezed in the middle. And of course now we have the proposed marijuana dispensary, and that brings on all kinds of other possible traffic issues. So we don't really have control over a lot of what we do. Unlike all the city streets that we have control over those. When we talk about the county and the state, because Dr. Nash knows, we've been asking for this traffic signal in Western Gibraltar for what, close to 20 years, and we get turned down every year. And so we've got problems out there that nobody else knows about or sees. You can come up Forest Drive and get on 50 or wherever you're going, and you'll never know what's going on out there where we are. And I have to be the advocate for everybody to see what's going on out there, because we've got a real problem. Now we've got parole places in the pipeline, so we're working with Mr. Hyatt and his folks. So there's a lot going on out there that a lot of people in the city of Annapolis don't see. But the fear is, and what we describe it as, where we are, over time and over generations, we've gotten stuff we don't want, and the stuff we're asking for, we can't get. because we don't have the control like everyone else does within the city streets. We have city, state, and county that we have to deal with, and trying to mesh all of that. We also recently had a developer to come in who wanted to put a assisted living right there as you come off when you're traveling west on Chicklet Pit, and after you pass kind of the Fairfax, but you're on Aris T. Allen, that little road that comes out, they wanted to put a assisted living between that and Fairfax. And we all know how people come off that Chicklet Pit light and they're trying to get on to Aris, and they're going on to Aris T, and you've got 3 lanes, and the 3rd lane is trying to squeeze over, and everybody's gunning to get out of there. And so we had that issue too. So there are a lot of issues that are going on out there that make not a whole lot of sense, but we don't have a whole lot of control over. So when you have the control of the city streets, that's fine, but then it backs up like a balloon when you get to parole. So that's a lot of the problems that we're dealing with that nobody else in the city has to deal with but us. So in many ways, over time, we've been the forgotten child, but I say no more. And so trying to deal with all of that, because we're abutting the county and what they do around the town center, we have absolutely no control over, because people have asked me about Maris, and I said I can't do anything about Maris. It's there, and there's nothing I could do about it. And so technically, we really can't do anything about the proposed marijuana dispensary, because that little piece of 0.2 acres is in the county. And so there are a lot of things that we are dealing with that no one else has to deal with.
Alderwoman Tierney.
Thank you.
A couple of things, I guess, just to briefly address that. I think all the aldermen should have an interest in this, that this sector study area covers over 2/3 of the city's land area and includes 65% of the city's population and 63% of resident workers. It's more commercial acreage than other parts of the city. So we all have a stake in that as far as the livelihood of the city of Annapolis. And I think when they talk about, the placemaking and the live walk, it's specific to Forest Drive. It's not really trying to introduce what that means from one ward to the other. But that, and I understand completely the interface with the county, but to that point on the intersections, there is a recommendation, and it's one that we could do today, which was the signalization of 3 locations. And I say that today, is that something, instead of waiting to get that from a developer, maybe we would have to bite the bullet and get that in a capital improvement budget. That's on our court, and it can be lost as far as all the other stuff here. And then I forgot what else I was going to ask. We were talking about something else, and I had a point, but that's okay. Okay.
I'm also going to propose, and then I'll have it for the committee as well, that one of the amendments be that the various forms of incentivizing the affordable housing be included in the study as well. I think it will inform all the alderpersons. We don't have the subject matter knowledge that the 3 of you do, and when you just list them out in list format, we can study them more in depth. We can take a look at them to see if anyone wants to take on proposing any of those things in the city. I know that some of them have competing interests, so not all of them may be appropriate, but it certainly would give us the ability to do that. It would give the public notice of the potential of those things. It would give the development community notice of the potential of those things coming down the pipeline. So I'm going to ask for an amendment to be that the examples of incentives for affordable housing, that those different things that you mentioned with the removing the regulatory hurdles, the different tax incentives as well, some of those other things that open you up to and thank you for the correction, not the affordable housing, but the workforce housing that takes us not with the 80% AMI and below, but the above 80% AMI that opens you up to the different avenues as well. I think this is the final point of what I was asking. Mine was looking at the areas that you chose to study. Some of the areas that don't get a lot of attention in the city, I felt like were overlooked in the study as well, and I'm sure there was a larger logic as to what you guys took a look at. But that area in Eastport, the Monroe Court, Brashears, Jackson, that whole little community that's there in Eastport. Once Eastport Terrace Harbor House is redeveloped and then the rest of Eastport is kept in great condition, that's gonna be sandwiched in between, and it'll likely look out of date and out of place. Is there any particular reason why that was not a part, or was it a part of the study and then just not included in the data? Or I'd like to understand that a little better.
Well, it was included in our traffic analysis, but it wasn't included as a community character type, because although we do have some community character types in Eastport proposed, we, for the most part, we tried not to make too many land use recommendations for Eastport, because we were trying to focus on the Forest Drive corridor, which was the original intent of the study. Eastport got added in mainly for traffic concerns, but we didn't want to broaden the scope so much to look at applying community character type everywhere in Eastport. The places we did apply in Eastport were places that were on our radar for some reason, like there's a development proposal there, or there's a lot of public interest in that site. And from what I'm hearing you say is, I think you would want the neighborhood scale to be preserved there and protected, but maybe just enhanced in terms of facilities, you know, maybe sidewalks, street trees, that kind of thing. Is that what you're saying for that neighborhood? I mean, there wouldn't necessarily be a change in that community character type in that neighborhood.
I wanted the professionals to take a look at it. I don't know that I have the expertise to say what would be the highest and best plans for that community, but I know that with development on one end of it, the shopping center on the other end of it, and then just the general character of the neighborhood that surrounds it, that with all of that going on in its surrounding area, that it could start to feel out of place over time. So I thought it would have been a great opportunity for a professional eye to say what the future of that community could have been.
Right.
It's a possibility. I'd characterize some of the things that we were looking at were, I call them susceptible to change. We know in the near future they're about to change. If we didn't designate it, it's because it's probably pretty stable, and that's what it's going to be from now into the near future. But that's not saying that as those areas that we identified as susceptible to change couldn't have more investment in other communities. So
there's another spot I identified, on Forest Drive, the reserve at Quiet Waters. There's the development kind of in the woods right in the community where the Kitty Academy or Thomas Woods might go. That community was sold to a new investor, and they were looking to make some investments in the property. It's a New York company. They're not familiar with Annapolis, but looking to invest in the property. Forest Hills Avenue kind of splits the neighborhood in half. I was trying to work with them to see if they would put a sidewalk there. The kids walk to school that are in that community, and I didn't see that identified in the sector study as any particular area of interest. And I hear you saying that susceptible to change was kind of the standard that you were looking for to identify what's the future of this area. So maybe that didn't make it on the radar as susceptible to change, but
those are still good ideas. I mean, it's, you know, we can still incorporate them. Yeah.
I just wanted to you were amending.
That could be an amendment to this, or we could, you know, make sure to include that in the comprehensive plan.
Thank you.
I thought I heard you say you wanted to amend it for what we could ask developers, and I thought you could expand on its B5, or where it's kind of funny. It's a national, it's Appendix B, U.S. City Economic Trends Memo, so it's not city specific, but at the end you have a very good checklist of how are healthy cities adapting to these trends, blah, 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 and then you do cite about you mentioned establish development tax or value capture incentives, property tax infrastructure impact fees, using property tax abatements, incentivize developers to include affordable and/or workforce housing as a portion of new mixed-use projects, which is a no-brainer for this sector study, is introducing the MDUs in any of these mixed use. And then streamlining, as you said, Pete, streamlining or shortening permitting processes and timeline. So, I mean, they could expand on that. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah.
Those are great ideas.
Yeah. Could I make just a couple of comments? One of them is, these are good ideas. This is an opportunity that we haven't had in a long time to just sort of, talk about these things in a serious way. I can only encourage you to get into the comp plan and keep an eye out for your wards and for the city as a whole, and take a look at specifics, because the comp plan will be and could be more specific if you want it to be, or it'll just be a policy statement. So get involved with it. Stay on it. Help us, because we're the ones who are going to be doing it rather than a consultant, the Planning Commission and the staff. The other thing I want to encourage is, I really strongly encourage you to take a look at the MPDU legislation and the policy that we have now. And I am putting forth an invitation to work with us and to do something about it, and have perhaps some discussions like this to get some ideas flowing and to get the facts out onto the table as to what's going on and why.
I think Mark Rodriguez, if I'm not correct, has submitted a request to the law office for MDU legislation.
He has several things that he's asked for changes. So he had, Alderman Rodriguez has submitted a request to the law office for several changes to the MPDU legislation. So
I haven't seen it.
It's still in the formatting phase. I think they're reviewing it also for legal sufficiency too, just to make sure that what we're requesting is going to be, makes the cut, is up to speed. And so once he knows that it's up to speed, then I think he intends to kind of share that with people.
I wish you were here tonight. My invitation is this. I invite you to join with the commission in having some kind of open work session on MPDUs, where Ms. Wellman, a few other people around who are involved in this, talk briefly, 10 to 15 minutes. We have some discussion about where we are and what can be done. And I would recommend that we do it fairly quickly if some of this is underway. Because I learned a lot this morning, and there are lots of ideas, but clearly things need to be done.
Shanika chaired our, when was that? We talked 2 hours about it, and that was the genesis. We talked about 2 hours on MPDUs, and it was a great discussion at the Housing and Community Development meeting. And that was the genesis of Mark saying, I'm going to, start on it. And I believe Montgomery County was somewhat used as a model. So that's where we're at. But if we'd like to meet somehow, or how that would.
Thank you for being willing to collaborate on that. We would welcome that. Alderwoman?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Just a couple more things, and I emailed my colleagues as well as Mr. Gutwall and Dr. Nash. I did not see a mention of anything between Fairfax Road and Old Solomon's Island Road. There was no mention that I saw of that portion of Forest Drive between Fairfax and Old Solomon's. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think Old Solomon's is mentioned as a...
But nothing between Fairfax Road and Old Solomon's. That's a piece of Forest Drive that I did not see mentioned in the report.
Yeah, I don't know if there were any specific recommendations. It was part of our traffic analysis, and
I didn't see anything.
There's some overlap with the community character designations of those areas.
Between that Fairfax crossing, that small road, and up to Old Solomon's, that portion of Forest Drive? I didn't see anything mentioned about that, nor, and I know Dr. Nash mentioned today about the history of the people with the summer homes coming out of the county down in the Arundel, on the Bay kind of area, and I had asked originally to look at Old Solomon's all the way out to Riva Road, especially because Mr. Gordon mentioned the other day that there may be an intermodal transit center, so that would definitely impact that. So I didn't see anything in the report about Old Solomon's onto a Forest Drive extended all the way to Riva Road, because they didn't mention about that.
That was all part of our traffic analysis.
Okay, I didn't see narrative-wise anything mentioned about that. That for Ward 3 is extremely important to talk about that, because that directly impacts whether at the shoppers, at the Office Depot, which are frequently travel, Chick-fil-A, so that's travel as well. One other thing.
Just so I can, yeah, I mean, I know we studied and looked at the area, so you're looking for a narrative of what we did and discovered? Okay.
Yeah. And because Ward 3 is so different, I'm looking for my colleagues, even on the council, especially public safety, to be looking at possibly us providing some sort of historical narrative as an amendment to this report as well, because I think it's extremely important that we hear what I've indicated today, the history of that area. And so possibly on Monday when we have our public safety meeting, that might be something I can provide to you and we can kind of look at and talk about later, if that's, because I know Alderwoman Henson is on public safety as well, I think, because the Upper West Street sector study is still in draft form, but it all bleeds into this Forest Drive sector study, and that's really extraordinarily important. So that's what I have to say about that. So it's different. We're different, and unless you travel it every day, you really don't know that. So
I've been saying that, you know that.
I know, but you know, I gotta keep on saying it. So
You know I travel it every day.
huh?
You know I travel it.
I live it and travel it every day, and I gotta live in there because I represent the people who live there, and they're the ones that come to me and tell me what the problems
I
are.
think pushing for a couple of those intersections.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, okay. Well, thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to weigh in. I appreciate that, and we'll talk about it some more on Monday at the public safety
Thank
meeting.
you.
So, thank you so much.
Thank
Appreciate
you
it.
for attending, and thank you for the discussion.
2 Mondays.
Oh, okay.
Yes, following Monday. I'm sorry. Thank you, thank you,
Thank
you, Mr. Gutwall. Monday after next.
We are trying to honor the time commitment that we have to get all the amendments and comments back and have the plan approved. So Alderwoman Tierney and myself are trying to work out the Housing and Human Welfare proposed amendments so that we can vote on them tonight to recommend it favorably, so that you all don't have to see our smiling faces on this again. So if you will indulge us for a second, we are.
Yeah, I think. Do you feel that there's any need to identify the underutilized properties along Forest Drive? Do you feel that there's any help? Is that, or do you feel like you have?
Graphically identify them.
Looking at.
I think we highlighted susceptible to change is what I keep using that terminology. So when you say
Yeah, areas
underutilized,
susceptible to change. I just didn't know if that was, you know, it's kind of funny because it's kind of like you don't know, what's that expression my mother used to say? You don't know where you're going if you don't know how to get there. It's sort of like applicable here. Sorry, we're asking you to like expand on stuff that we don't even know if we're moving forward on, but I guess that's.
So we do try to, yeah, we did identify areas susceptible to change on page 29.
Do you think that's adequate?
On where?
Page 29.
Because this is important as far as adaptive reuse and. Okay, I think I'm just looking at stuff that we haven't addressed yet, and
I want to take on some of Alderman Rodriguez's points. He's asking that we have something that protects small businesses. He said there's numerous small businesses and he wants to make sure that they're allowed to still have employment opportunities. So as we have areas susceptible to change, he wants to make sure that there's still a place for small businesses. Some of the suggestions have more large-scale themes, themes that incorporate mixed uses, and that small businesses may not be able to accommodate the mixed use concept. So what can the sector study do to accommodate the small business?
Mixed use is the best
Yeah,
environment.
I was going to
for
say
small
it does.
businesses.
Yeah.
It's the worst environment for a big box. It's the best for small businesses. And when you let these things develop over time and sort of organically and slowly, you end up with places that people want to be, villages.
So let's say Pit Boys on Forest Drive in his ward. They own their building currently. They probably own their lot. Let's say you want to, that's identified as in yellow here. If some other place buys that and then wants to make a 3-story building that has Pit Boys and 2 other things on the bottom and apartments on top, let's say you or some other business doesn't have the capital to make apartments for 2 stories and then 2 other things commercial on the bottom, how do you as a small business that can only afford your one business, 1-story building on Forest Drive, how do we protect you in a plan that says the goal is to not have one building, 1 story, but to have multiple uses?
You can't protect everybody in the market.
Okay.
Let me put that in a more positive light. We're not going to eliminate those opportunities. Again, I keep coming back to the mixed-use centers and the susceptible to change. Those are opportunities for those uses, but there's still other opportunities along the corridor. If we need to put a statement that's, I keep coming back to preserving the existing neighborhoods and just enhancing them. It doesn't mean that we're eliminating the ability for that person to have an independently owned operating building in the corridor, or even one of those susceptible areas. It doesn't mean they can't get we do a subdivision and they have their own lot out of that. So it creates the opportunity to have, individual standalone businesses, I think is what you're getting at. It doesn't eliminate those opportunities. They're still there, and we will continue to preserve and enhance those opportunities to allow for those individual standalone businesses to operate, because sometimes that's what's going to happen. That's what
Is that what he wants, though, or does he just want a small business opportunity? Because
he just wants maintain conditions that allow numerous small businesses to provide significant employment opportunities and economic activity.
I totally agree with what Bob originally said. Mixed uses is the place where you're going to, those opportunities are going to thrive. But if there's the individual, when you just started to describe Pit Boys, I'm thinking to myself, well, that's an independent. Yeah. They want to have their independent. They want to own the land. There are those business, structures, business plans that they have to operate with their own land and their own property and their own building. They want control over all of that, and I get it. Not eliminating that, trying to preserve that, but at the same time provide additional opportunities. And mixed use, as Bob said, is that's the prime way in which small businesses can. For example,
I think these definitions of urban village, they're very conducive to a small business going in and opening up a storefront and all of that.
But I also think I think what I'm trying to say in balance, and I think what Mark's getting at is that there is business plans in which they want control over their own building. And if they're in they have to be on the first floor of a 3-story building and they can't afford to build all of that, they want that control over that building. And I don't know if that's what he's getting at or not, but I think we're trying to balance both of those.
Yeah.
So.
His second thing was the influx of newer residents in recent years with resulting language and cultural issues. Does the sector study, other than noting the demographic changes, does it have, and I don't know that he's making a specific ask, influx of newer residents in recent years with resulting language and cultural issues? It does note the demographic change. Awkward traffic flow at the intersection of Old Forest, Chicklet Road, and Forest Drive. I feel like Alderwoman Pendle Charles very articulately and passionately gave us an overview of that. The
It's an
need
F.
for
It's an F.
not good. The need for better connectivity throughout this area. The sector
I
study
think that
should.
party was just quoting from the 2009 comprehensive plan.
Okay.
And then I think he highlighted the part about the influx of new residents and wanted us to make sure that that was considered in the plan. And like you said, I don't know if we explicitly did that, but we tried to paint a picture of an increasingly diverse city that has different needs than it did 20 years ago because it has a more diverse population. But
I think taking the data from minority to the different racial groups will help paint the picture of the city a little brighter. I think that will kind of help with that. The sector study should also undertake an examination of the zoning along West Street directly to the east of Legion Avenue. This plan recommends the retention of the existing character in that stretch of West Street, R3 NC zone. However, a look at uses permitted in that zone is merited. This examination acknowledges that while the character of that stretch of West Street should remain, the commercial function of the buildings has become as important as their residential use and should be supported. Did you guys have?
again, that's a quote from the 2009 plan. I don't, the way I read his email, maybe I was wrong, but I didn't think he wanted us to necessarily address that part of that policy, but I could have misread it, but that was my.
Okay, he just said, please see the following. Okay. If you feel like his impressions were adequately addressed, then, all right. Alderwoman, did you have any other amendments?
Well, I want to be clear on the terminology. Because I think our amendment is going to stress the importance of for example, on like page 60, whatever, 60 and 63, you talk about the, or page 50, which is sort of the meat of the study, all hypothetical, that it's all contingent on future rezoning built on character designations, and you mentioned the urban village center and the urban neighborhoods. And then the urban center you recommend in parts of Bay Ridge, Old Solomon Island, that's where I saw Old Solomon's Island, and Eastport. So I'm asking that this is an opportunity for an MDU and/or affordable housing to integrate diversity where the jobs may be as well. I mean, is that a fair request? And is it MDU and affordable housing equated, or what were you saying, Bob, earlier, that MDU is what is that?
He's calling it workforce housing.
Workforce? Is it workforce housing or affordable housing?
MPDU?
MPDU. Say MD.
MPDUs are for people, as Ms. Henson said, for people in the median.
Moderately priced, yeah.
80 to 120% of the median income.
Yeah,
So we're just going to say.
120% of the median. And what has been called affordable housing is for people below 80%. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Right. So below that, it's generally government supported, and above that, or in that middle there, is what we call MPDU or workforce housing.
Do you think there's an opportunity for both MPDU and affordable housing in some of these mixed-use developments, or should we just focus on MPDUs? We got to get affordable housing in here.
We have a lot of government subsidized affordable housing.
Okay.
What we need is the next step up.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what we need. You know, people who are employed, trying to make it, got a family, you know, government workers of one sort or nurses, you know, the
Teachers.
Well, yeah. I mean, the study shows that. And this is related to that. There's a statistic here that 87% of city jobs are filled from those who commute into the city. So I see the disconnect that they don't have a place to live in the city.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of huge.
There's a huge rush hour into Annapolis.
Yeah, no, they've got numbers here, page 25, 87% of city jobs. So So it's, I mean, it's such an obvious solution is to add this housing that I'm struggling with what I'm calling it. It's just the moderately priced dwelling units?
Where specifically would you like to see that appear that it doesn't? Are there any particular parts that you feel it's more appropriate to?
We have to just optimize we have to optimize that when we look at these village centers and urban neighborhoods, these character designations that they include MPDUs. That's the
Dr.
first
Nash,
step.
do you, on page 53, where the different community character designations are defined, we are making an ask that the that the moderately priced dwelling units, it's a part of our code currently, so any housing that's built would have to have it taken into consideration, but we would be asking that it be expressly put in as a part of what's being listed there. Is it any place in particular that it would be more appropriate in any of the columns to tack it in? So our amendment 3 is going to be to add moderately priced the MPDUs to page 53 to the land use mix designation, to the land use mix columns. So we're going to read them all off, and then after we're going to read them all off once we've kind of got our list solidified, and then we'll vote on them and then vote on it to recommend with the amendments, and then after the meeting is when they'll really have to be fleshed out.
Yeah, I think the adequate facilities is more related to transportation, unfortunately. So, yeah, that's what I'd come away with then.
Are there any other amendments that can help the affordable housing or housing and community welfare in general components of the study?
Is there any language that can facilitate the job effort? I don't know.
Want more information about, I also pulled a chart about breakdown of unemployment by race.
Yes.
Employment by race, which
Thank
is kind
you.
of interesting. But that was another comment you had.
Yes, I did. That would be most helpful as well. I think it helps. I noticed that the studies that we publish as a city are often referenced and used long after the people who voted yea or nay on them are gone. And the data is important. It tells the story of who was here when people are making plans for the city. It tells the story of what was and what should be later on. So when we kind of paint with a broad brush and we say white and other, it leaves out a whole part of the city. So when we kind of dig deep into that data and say unemployment means this for this community and this for another community, it really says if we're going to plan for the city, this community has this particular need. So I would love to see the unemployment data.
It's pretty interesting, the distribution, because it is higher for African American males, but for women, it's higher for Hispanic women. So that was interesting.
See? Yes, it is. Amendment number 4 will be and I don't have in my notes where that chart is. We'll just have amendment number 4B to have the demographics of the unemployment data.
Madam Chair, I have just a process question. When we do the amendments, are we asking that they be inserted under a certain section within the study itself, or is that left to staff, I guess?
We are going to, as a committee, ask that the amendments be incorporated, and then it will be up to the professionals to best figure out how they weave into the study.
Fine, thank you.
Is that correct? Okay. Yes. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Nash. Am I missing anything else either from my notes or Alderman Rodriguez's notes? Thank you. You were kind enough to prepare those things in advance based on what we sent over to you. Alderwoman Tierney?
No, I think that there's a good chart here on what kind of the mismatch basically with jobs that we, where did I see this? I mean, where we might have a shortfall of jobs, and it could be conducive to this sector. There's some good data here that I think I don't know, we don't need to amend it, I don't think. Just trying to have an idea of what the driver is for the jobs. You mentioned an economic development plan or something. Where is that? I mean, I've never seen one.
That's online. It's our.
Is it under planning and zoning? Is that what Hollis did?
Strategic plan.
The one Hollis did?
Yes.
Okay. The strategic plan, okay, maybe it was called something different here.
I did ask for, to have the data for the walkers, the students who walk to school. We have a number of students that walk in the sector area. We have Annapolis Middle School, Tyler Heights, and Eastport Elementary. Those students all walk to school, but that's part of my public safety notes, so I'm going to revisit that in a couple weeks. So just putting a plug for that data, but I'm going to put a pin in that because I got ahead of myself.
You did not get ahead of yourself.
So, Alderwoman Tierney, is there anything else?
No, not for housing.
Okay.
Is economic development going to see this? Is there economic development? I think we all are, but.
Economic Matters.
That was the one that hadn't been referred to them, but I think Sheila's chair of the Rules Committee was going to ask Mark to take it up.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of economic issues or assumptions that, I would see they should look at it. And then I guess then it will go back to rules. And then.
Right. And I think it has to go back to transportation.
Yeah.
So.
It does. Is it going back?
We're just going to keep showing up.
Is it going back, or can I just send them my notes?
Yeah, that's true. It was remaining.
Ms. Green, can I make sure that I have all the amendments?
Rhonda wanted it to come back, I think. Rhonda, did you want it to come back to transportation, or were you going to get your comments addressed in another committee?
We're going to address them at public safety, which is the April 1st. And we'll see how that goes. So certainly, yes, we can definitely bring it back to transportation.
Okay. Okay.
Ms. Green, I want to make sure we have all the amendments for the record. The first amendment should be amending the demographic data in chart 2.24 to include all the racial categories. The second amendment should be expanding section B5 to make sure we have captured all the incentives for affordable housing.
More locally applicable than national, right? Yeah.
The third amendment should be adding the MPDUs to the land use column on page 53. And the fourth amendment should be adding the demographics to the unemployment data. Did we capture all four of those for the record?
You just did. That was the first
Okay,
time
that's unless she works miracles.
Thank you.
Four, because you said them out loud.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You had never mentioned.
I didn't.
No.
I kind of went on a winding road there, but now we have them for the record. And
so I can have.
you can't read, you can see it. That's of little value.
Don't
you
ask
can't
me.
read that. So, Alderwoman Tierney, are you satisfied that we have done our diligence to review it?
I think so. I think we did.
Excellent. Is there a motion to adopt the amendments to the Forest Drive sector study?
I motion that we adopt the 4 amendments suggested by the Housing Committee for adoption, for incorporation into the final draft of the Forest Drive sector study.
I second that we recommend the amendments. I second the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
The motion carries. Is there a motion to recommend the Forest Drive sector study favorably with the 4 amendments proposed by the Housing and Human Welfare
Ooh, it's
Committee?
the first time. Figured it's me. I make a motion that we recommend the Forest Drive sector study with the 4 amendments that we have also recommended at this meeting.
I second the motion. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
The motion carries. I believe that is all the business before the committee. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I have a question. Is this Royal Farms thing, that's a huge litmus test to see how the public reacts to that. I mean, if they all cheer, that's probably doesn't look good for the Forest Drive sector study, but if they're in opposition to that, it's an opportunity to say this prevents that from happening, you know. Is that tonight?
It's tonight.
Well, are you going? I mean, are you going?
It's probably
or?
over now.
Oh, you know what I mean? If that, it's
Yeah.
very unfortunate.
Staff doesn't go to the community meetings.
But I mean, what my point is if this Forest Drive sector study was adopted, or it would not support a Royal Farms at that location. It
Right.
would be a
That's
lost
the
opportunity.
epitome of an autocentric suburban.
It is,
Give that to the representatives.
it actually is a lost opportunity, regardless of accepting this or not.
There's
The opportunity to downzone certain places is also.
It's that,
Yeah, that's a different discussion between form-based zoning and downzoning. Okay, I'll make a motion that we adjourn before our heads explode.
Second the motion. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Thank you both again.
Sally, I sent you a worksheet that I titled Transportation.
No.